War is good for business. Peace is good for business. As long as you can make a deal and obtain some gold-pressed platinum, it is good for business. So with that said, do you want to make a deal? Greetings and welcome back to Checkpoint Gaming, Star Trek Ascendancy. With this episode, we will be going over the game mechanics. With each round of the game, it consists of 3 stages: Initiative, Execution, and Recharge. During the Initiative stage, it is where the turn order for the given round will be determined. In the early turns before first contact is made, no one is eligible to influence galactic politics. Because of this, all turn order cards are to be passed out randomly. When playing with 3 players, use cards 1, 2, and 3. The additional turn order card can be used the optional rules or in games with more than 3 players. But with the players who make first contact, they have the option to spend resources that they possess in order to seize the initiative at the start of the game round. The player who spends the most resources will get first pick of the turn order card for the upcoming round. The remaining players who spend resources will choose the turn order in the same order based upon how many resources they bid. The bidding process will begin with the player who went first in the previous round, and the players who made first contact replace the number of resources on the turn order card they used in the previous turn. When players commit resources, they do so in order of the turn order card that they hold from the previous turn. When it is the player's turn, they may always choose not to commit any resources. If they decide to commit resources, they cannot spend the same amount of resources as any other player who had already bid. Because of this, each player will have to openly commit the resources during the bidding process. And when choosing the turn order, the bidding players can choose whatever card they wish. And with the spending of resources, it can be a mixture of any resource token types. Regarding the resources that are committed to bidding, they are discarded and returned to the supply. For players who have not made first contact with another civilization, they will have no ability to influence other civilizations and cannot participate in this bidding process. Because of this, they will receive a random turn order card for the remaining cards. This also extends to players who decide not to bid. During the execution stage, players will take turns in the order decided by the initiative stage to build up their civilization, research new projects, upgrade their weapons and shields, and issue commands to their ships. Players may also spend 5 culture to ascend on their turn. Starting with the player that is holding the turn order 1 card, or the lowest turn order card, if using the random determined turn order cards, players will take their turns. With each player's turn, it consists of the build phase followed by the command phase. At the start of each player's turn, it begins with the player's build phase, where they will get to spend resources to develop their civilization, research advancements, and upgrade their weapons and shields. When performing these actions, they may be done in any order. There are some special rules that allow said player to perform an extra action during the build phase, which can also be done at any time during the player's build phase. With the building of ships, it costs 1 production to build 1 ship. When they are built, they can be constructed at the player's home system, assuming that the player is still in possession of it, one of the star bases that they control, or in a system that is allowed by one of their advancements. If the player builds 3 or more ships, then they are allowed to immediately group them into a fleet without spending a command, assuming that the player can commission a fleet at this time. With colonizing system, it may be done on undeveloped planetary system that the player is occupying. A system is undeveloped when it doesn't contain any nodes. To colonize a system, the player will need to build a control node on it. However, some factions have a special rule that will allow them to colonize worlds in other ways. With the standard rules, establishing a new colony is a resource-intensive process where ships are often used as the functional core of a new colony. In order to colonize an undeveloped system, the player will need to spend 1 culture and 1 ship that is found in orbit of said system. This is what will allow the player to build a control node and claim the system. With some planets, they are rich in natural resources. With each system, it has the capacity to produce a certain resource as indicated by the colored tabs found upon the planet. This shows how many of each type of node may be built. With building a node within a system, the player will have to control it with the construction of a given resource node requiring the listed cost to build that given type. With some systems, they have an open capacity which allows the player to choose what type of node is going to be built. Later, resource nodes that are built on an open site can be replaced by paying the full cost of a new node. When a node has been built, it cannot just be destroyed, thus requiring the player to build a new one to replace it.
It is worth noting that with the Ferengi and their penchant for profit, they don't spend a lot of time building up their culture. As a result of this, they can never build culture nodes with the culture node on Ferenginar, typically being the only one they have. In order for them to gain more of such nodes, they must gain control of them through invasion or hegemony. However, they are able to build production nodes in a system regardless of the system's normal resource node capacity. What this means is that the Ferengi are allowed to build production nodes in spots that are designated for research if they wish. But with the site of the culture node, they can only build a production node on it. With all of that said, they cannot exceed the normal number of nodes a system can hold.
With each player, they have a limited number of ships and control nodes they can have on the table at any given time, and it is possible for a player to run out of components during a game. If a player does run out of components, they may disband a ship or control node, causing all resource nodes found in the system to be returned to the player's pool or to the supply. Also make sure that all players have the same number of ship and control nodes before the game begins.
On that player's turn, if they have used all of their control nodes during play, they are allowed to give up control of one of their systems that they control in order to colonize, invade, or hegemonize a different system. If they do this, then said player will place a number of warp tokens onto the abandoned system equal to the number of nodes found upon the system at the time of them relinquishing control of the system. The maximum number of warp tokens that are placed upon the system is 4. When doing this, it will make said system a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 independent civilization.
During the build phase, players may also commit research. To accomplish this, the player should place research tokens on an advancement project that they wish to advance. But they may only add 1 research token to each advancement project per turn from the resource reserves. Where the amount of research required to finish a given project is listed on the upper left-hand corner of each card. With claiming research from a phenomenon, it can speed up a project's completion. Once giving research tokens to a given project, players cannot move them around or take them back. For the first round of the game, players won't have any projects. It is during the command phase that players can use commands to launch a new project which are to be placed into the player's project area. With uncompleted projects, they may be discarded, which will cause it to go at the bottom of its respective advancement deck, and any research tokens found on it is to be returned to the supply. Once a player has committed enough research tokens to finish their project, it will become an advancement and it will be moved to the player's advancement area. And if it is applicable, well, the player can use the completed advancement special rule immediately. Unless stated otherwise, special rules may be used during any player's turn. Players are also allowed to launch projects, even if doing so will cause them to temporarily exceed the maximum number of projects that they can do as dictated by the research nodes. But if they do this, said player will have to immediately discard down to their given limit. Regarding the discarding of project, it can either be a project that has already been researched or one of the newly launched projects. It is worth noting that some projects will use other resources and research in order to complete them. With that said, they're still limited by the number of research nodes the player controls.
With the Breen advancements, they work best when they are used within Breen territory. Because of this, the Breen player will be inclined to not venture out beyond the Breen territory, which makes sense since they are isolationists by nature.
With each advancement, it has a type listed on the right-hand edge of the card. Some advancement rules will also only affect certain advancement types. Upon finishing a project, it will be a good idea to let the rivals know what the new advancement will do, since it will influence how the game unfolds. On occasion, advancements may be exhausted. When exhausted, these advancements cannot be used in any way and will be refreshed during the recharge phase at the end of the game round. And if an advancement comes with a type, such as warp or command, the player who possesses said advancement will be unable to use said type until the advancement gets refreshed. Besides the type being listed, some advancements will picture a warp token found in the lower right-hand corner of the card. When completed, these advancements will increase the warp speed of the player's ship in addition to their special rules. Some advancements will also picture a command token, which is also found in the lower right-hand corner of the card. When completed, these advancements will immediately increase the number of commands a player will possess by 1. With this new command, it starts off exhausted and will be refreshed in the following recharge stage.
With some Romulan advancements, they will picture a culture token. Upon completion of these particular advancements, the Romulan player will claim a culture token. It is worth noting that this is a Romulan special rule and cannot be applied to other civilizations that complete a Romulan advancement. And if this advancement type gets exhausted, the bonus culture will not get revoked.
In addition to committing research tokens to a project, research tokens can be spent on a player's weapons and shields. The cost of upgrading the player's weapons and shields is listed upon the command console directly across from their current weapon and shield levels, which can be a little confusing since people will tend to look like the next level up when trying to determine the price. It seemed like a little more quality assurance testing was needed on this front. So to try to keep things simple, remember, the price is found directly across, not above. Unlike the projects, upgrading weapons and shields is a single, one-time cost and thus are not something that the player can commit research to over time. So basically, the player will need to spend everything at once.
With the Andorians, they take great pride in proving their technological superiority. At the start of their turn, the Andorians will take culture if their shields or weapons are better than those of other players. If both shields and weapons are both better than other players, the Andorian player will get 2 culture.
With some advancement special rules, they will allow the player to do something extra during the build phase. When using these special rules, it can be done at any time while the player is building. With the culture tokens, the player may spend 5 of them to gain an Ascendancy token at any time during their turn. After completing the building phase, the command phase will begin. Once a player has begun their command phase, they cannot spend resources to build anything unless a special rule allows them to do so. There are also a number of things that can be done during the command phase through the issuing of commands. These commands are 1. Move starships and fleets, 2. Initiate a space battle, 3. Invade a planet, 4. Attempt cultural hegemony, 5. Commission a fleet or starbase, 6. Launch new advancement projects, and 7. Activate special rules. When issuing a command, the player will exhaust one of their command tokens in order to show that it has been used. As long as the player has enough remaining command tokens, the player may issue all the aforementioned actions multiple times per turn. But when a player doesn't have any more commands to issue, then their turn is over. Once a player's turn is over, the player with the next turn order card will take their turn. With the recharge stage, it happens at the end of each game round where some basic game maintenance takes place. First is the victory check, which sees if anyone has achieved an Ascendancy, Supremacy, or Vulcan Agenda victory. If so, and they have control over their home system, then that player has won the game. Otherwise, the game will continue. Second, resource generation occurs when each of the resource nodes will generate one resource token of its type. Trade agreements will generate its listed resource or resources, and the appropriate advancements provide their resources. With each resource node, it will produce one resource of its type, with production nodes generating production, research nodes generating research, and culture nodes generating culture. Third, refresh any cards and tokens that have been exhausted, add warp tokens to ships and fleet found in warp, and resupply phenomena with resource tokens if any phenomena don't have the respective number. If it already has research, then don't add any more to it. After the recharge stage, the next round will begin. With the command tokens, each player should have a span of 5 commands, except for the Cardassians, who will have 6 due to their totalitarian regime advancements, plus any other commands that are added due to starbases and completed advancement. Also refresh any trade agreements that have been exhausted for one reason or another. Regarding the phenomena, although most only have one resource printed on it, some phenomena can have 2 or 3 resources listed. But if a player has no ship and does not control any systems, then their civilization has been exterminated and that player has been eliminated from the game. All the player's cards, including rival trade agreements and advancements, are to be discarded. Any of their advancements held by rivals will remain in play until they are discarded by said rival.
With Cardassian-controlled systems, they can only generate resources if there is a Cardassian ship found in orbit around the system. With the Ferengi, since profit is the only thing that matters to them, they are allowed to purchase a culture tokens at the rate of 5 production for 1 culture.
When it comes to that of trade agreements, they have a number of resources pictured on them. During resource generation, players will take resources pictured with trade agreements that they received from other players. Since players are not able to trade with themselves, they do not get anything from their own trade agreements. So holding onto their own trade agreements don't do the player any good. Only trade agreements from other players will generate resources.
With the starting advancement for the Ferengi, whenever they have one of their ships in a rival-controlled system, they generate 1 production. So the more rival systems the Ferengi find themselves in, the more profits they receive. When it comes to the Ferengi trade agreements, they do not have a fixed value to them. Instead, they generate 1 production for each system that the player controls and has a Ferengi ship in orbit. So if a player holds a Ferengi trade agreement, it's a good idea to have one of their ships in each system they control. This helps show that both sides can come out winners in a deal.
There are times when a trade agreement can become exhausted, preventing the holder of said agreement from receiving any resources from said trade agreement during resource generation. With exhausted trade agreements, they may not be revoked or exchanged until they are refreshed during maintenance. This can be seen with the Romulan special rule requiring them to exhaust all trade agreements when they receive one or have one they hold is exchanged for another. With some advancements, they are able to generate resources. These cards will not picture the resources being generated since they will often vary from one turn to another. With some of the special rules found on the advancements or on the command console, they may require the player to exhaust a command in order to use that special rule. With the special rules that require the use of a command, they may be used multiple times per turn. Unless the special rule says otherwise, special rules may be used during any player's turn. Some card special rules will instruct the player to exhaust the card itself. In order to exhaust a card, the player will need to flip it face down. With abilities that require the player to exhaust a card, it can only be done once per game round. Exhausted cards are refreshed at the end of each game round during the recharge stage.
With the Ferengi espionage advancements, they exhaust certain types of cards. Unlike other espionage cards, the Ferengi may use theirs multiple times in a turn as long as they can pay the production costs.
When a card is exhausted, it is temporarily out of the game until it is refreshed during the recharge stage at the end of the turn. And when a card is exhausted, it cannot be used in any way. However, tokens that were gained from or placed upon the advancement will remain in place. If a player has finished a rival's advancement, that player will gain the benefits of that special rule. Any reference to the rival's civilization now becomes a reference to said player's civilization. When ships are moved along the play area, they can do so at impulse or at warp speed. With each movement command, it will move one ship or fleet. Players are allowed to issue more than one movement command for the same ship in a single turn. As ships are moved into unexplored space, players will need to place new space lanes and system disks on the board, building the galactic map as they play. When players discover and place a new system disk, it will always end the player's movement. With all ships, they all have a base impulse speed of 2. In order to move a ship at impulse, exhaust a command and move a ship or fleet up to 2 sectors. While moving at impulse, the player may place a new space lane and system. But with discovering a new system, it will always end the player's movement. For a ship or fleet to enter warp, a command will need to be exhausted, with the ship or fleet being moved just off the space lane or system they are in, and a warp token being placed next to it. This warp token will need to be pointed at the sector for which they entered warp. With ships and fleets that are found in warp, they will accelerate one additional warp token at the end of each game round in the recharge phase by simply being in warp. This number can also be increased by spending additional commands. When a ship is in warp, it does not count as being in the sector from which it left. For all intents and purposes, ships in warp are not on the board until they exit warp.
With the Ferengi Commerce Enforcement Squadron, it can enter warp on the Ferengi's turn without exhausting a command, but it can only do this if it has not exited warp in the same turn.
In order for a ship to exit warp, the player will need to exhaust a command. With exiting warp, it may move through a number of systems equal to the warp tokens they have accumulated, plus the number of warp tokens pictured on the player's completed advancements. If the ship or fleet entered warp from a system, don't count that system in which it started. With exiting warp, the player may choose to move through fewer systems or exit warp earlier in the space lane. If the player exits warp in the space lane, they can choose to stop in any sector of said space lane they wish. After exiting warp, discard the ship's warp tokens. The player can even choose to enter a new system as part of their warp movement. When entering a new system, it will always end the player's movement, even if they have any remaining movement from warp. While traveling in warp, players may travel through systems that they control without issue, even if rival ships are present. However, they cannot enter or pass through a sector that they do not control if it possesses hostile ships. This happens regardless if the player is using impulse or warp. If the sector contains peaceful ships, then the player will have to ask for permission to enter or move through said sector. They may agree to let said player pass, or they may not. If they do not let the player pass, then the player will have to end their movement. If a rival denies the player access to a system, then they cannot reverse the course and take the movement used to get there. If the player is traveling at warp, then they will have to end their movement in the sector previous to theirs.
With the Andorian Reconnaissance Fleet, they can seed a system with an Andorian deep space surveillance device. It may place one Andorian token on any rival-controlled system it is in orbit, or is connected to the space lane that the Reconnaissance Fleet occupies. However, they cannot place Andorian tokens on phenomena. The Andorian player may remove the Andorian tokens from the board at any time, even if they do not currently have a reconnaissance fleet. With the Ferengi Commerce Enforcement Squad, it is able to enter a system containing rival ships, but regardless of their trade status, it must end its movement there. The player may then exhaust an additional command to move it beyond that system at either impulse or at warp. With the Romulan Cloaked Orbital Mines advancement, it destroys hostile rival ships that enter a Romulan control system. This is opposed to them simply passing through the system without becoming in orbit of it. With the Andorian Command Fleet, the Andorian player may exhaust a command during their command phase to switch the position of their command fleet with any other Andorian fleet. With Vulcan, Honest Meddling, it allows the Vulcan player to use their commands to move other players' ships as long as they have a trade agreement with that player and they have that player's permission to do so. When moving another player's ship, all results of that movement still apply to the player whose ship are being moved. The Vulcan player also cannot lie to the other players. The Vulcan player should be as honest as possible given the information that they have at the time. They are not bound by earlier statements that no longer apply to changed circumstances. With the Vulcans, they are experts at diplomacy. This is reflected with their ambassadors, which the Vulcan player can place on an independent or peaceful system that their console fleet is in orbit of while the console fleet is moving at impulse speed. They may place up to 5 ambassadors in play at any time. When it comes to removing a Vulcan ambassador, rival players may remove it from their system on their turn. Doing so will return the ambassador to the Vulcan player's pool. With the moving of a Vulcan ambassador, the Vulcan player may exhaust an ambassador to move it to any system that is adjacent to their current system. Accompanying this, the Vulcan High Council's starting advancement allows the Vulcan player to exhaust the command to move an ambassador to any system that they control that is connected to their current system.
With some systems found in the game, they are marked as being a hazardous system. For these hazardous systems, they are marked with a red alert warning. When a ship ends its movement in a hazardous system, it has to brave the hazard in order to see if it survives. Assisting in this are the ship's shields, which help protect against the hazard. In order to brave a hazard, add the ship's shield modifier to the system's hazard level. Then the player to the right will then roll a die for each ship that ended its movement in the hazardous system. For each die roll that is equal to or higher than the shield modified hazard level, one ship is destroyed. If the player doesn't stop in the hazardous sector, then they won't have to make a hazard roll. The player was just able to navigate around the dangerous system. If a player builds ships or fleets in a hazardous sector, then they won't need to make a hazard roll when they deploy them or when they leave the system. Ships will only have to brave the hazard when they end their movement there. Unless the player is playing the Vulcans, there are 2 win conditions found in the game. These consist of possessing the most ascendancy tokens or to obtain military dominance over the other players. For the Vulcans, they have their own agenda to look after. With the Ascendancy victory, if at the end of a game round, a player has both control over their home system and has obtained 5 Ascendancy tokens, then they have won the game. This represents the player establishing cultural dominance over the galaxy. With the purchasing of Ascendancy tokens, they can be done at any time upon the player's turn for exchange of 5 culture tokens. With Supremacy victory, if at the end of the game round, the player has both control over the home system and control over 2 rival home systems, then they have won the game. This represents the player establishing military dominance over the galaxy. Home systems that were assimilated by the Borg or that belong to players who were exterminated still count as a home system for purposes of a Supremacy victory. This requirement also extends to games where all playable factions are in play. Yeah, it would be great to dominate more than 2 rival home systems, but having control over their home system and that of 2 of the rivals is all that the player will need to win. It is worth noting that with the Vulcan player, if they completed the Vulcan Exodus advancement, they may change their home system. What this means is that their old home system will no longer represent their home system and thus cannot count toward an opponent's Supremacy victory. That's what you get with the Kelvin timeline. With the Vulcan player, they can only achieve victory through the completion of one of their agendas. This means that they cannot win through Ascendancy victory or Supremacy victory that has just been described. The Vulcan player can still obtain Ascendancy or Supremacy victory, but they will have to fall within the parameters of a given agenda that they drew. The Vulcan player also does not need to control their home system in order to achieve victory.
There is one agenda that says to win the game, complete 3 advancements from other players with at least 1 from each. If the player count is 4 or less, the Vulcan player will have to complete at least 1 advancement from every other player with a total of 3 advancements in order to win. But if there are more than 4 players, then the Vulcan player will only have to complete 1 advancement from 3 of the other players to win.
At the end of any given game round, there are at least 2 players that have achieved victory, either through Ascendancy, Supremacy, or Agenda. The player who controls the most number of systems is deemed the winner. But if both players control the same number of systems, then both civilizations will have risen to greatness and will thus share the victory.
There are also some rules that are classified as optional that players may wish to use to make the game more challenging, faster, or simply different. Players may choose to use any, all, or none of these rules during their game. Players should also feel free to make up their own variations in house rules. These rules are also divided into accelerated and advanced. First, we will be looking at the accelerated rules. It is possible for all players to take their first turns simultaneously, where they build and spend their commands at the same time. However, players may not make contact with other players this turn, and if everyone agrees to it, the second turn may also be simultaneous. If agreed upon, each player can also start the game with additional resources with 8 production, 6 research, and 4 culture. Players may also choose to allow each player to start with 1 project found in their project area at the start of the game. If the player is new, then they will draw a project at random. But if the player is experienced, then they may pick which project that they will start with. During game setup, each player may start with 1 completed advancement beyond their initial starting advancement. If doing so, players can either draw an advancement randomly or to look through their advancement deck and choose which advancement they like to have. With turn order, instead of having players devote resources to bid on the turn order cards during the initiative stage of each game round, they may agree to just pass the turn order cards out randomly for each turn. Players can also agree upon allowing culture tokens to be used as either production or research tokens. They can also agree upon having easier ascension by reducing the cost for ascendancy from 5 culture tokens down to 4. With that taken care of, we can move on to the advanced rules. These rules are meant for players who have a few games under their belt. For those who want a mysterious turn order, use twice as many turn order cards as there are players with each game round. Shuffle the turn order cards and put half of them aside. When it is each player's turn to choose a turn order card, they don't reveal their choice to their rivals until it is their turn. If wanting to only use the initial turn order cards, this will max out the players at 5. But if the players want to play with 6 or more players, then a standard playing deck should be used. For those who want a random galaxy, instead of separating the phenomena during setup, shuffle all the system decks together. With trade agreements, players may choose to have unrestricted trade routes. Instead of asking for permission to travel through sectors of rivals whom a player is at peace with, they can freely move through rival ships. With revoking trade agreement, it can only be done on the player's turn. Players may also have a humble beginnings where each player starts off with no resources and no ascendancy except for the Vulcans, who will begin the game with 3 ascendancy as per normal starting rules. Players may also have a focused research where upon spending a command to launch a new project, instead of randomly drawing 2 advancements, they may look through their advancement deck and choose 1 advancement as the project to launch. Players may also engage in allied cooperation where a player attempts to colonize a system, invade a planetary system, or attempt cultural hegemony where it is only said player and a peaceful rival have ships in a system. In order to perform one of these actions, the player may ask the rival for permission to do so. If permission is granted, then the player can proceed as if their ships were the only ones in the system. But if the only rival does not give permission, then the player will have to fully occupy the system before attempting any of the aforementioned actions as normal. This rule can also be extended to battles where the player is defending and all of unattacked peaceful rivals found in the sector can decide to join in upon the defense or to stay out of the battle. In a similar manner, any effects that require a player to occupy a sector also be permitted by a peaceful rival.
So with that said, that's what you need to know about the game mechanic of Star Trek Ascendancy. We can now start talking about the faction development and expansions. If you like this episode, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to stay up to date on any future episodes we upload, go ahead and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/checkpointgaming. See you in the next episode, and happy gaming.